Have you ever done everything right and still got treated like a threat? Not loud, not reckless, not wrong, just black, just present. And that was enough. It happened at 8:22 p.m. on a quiet stretch of Highway 217. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't swerving. She wasn't even out of uniform. Her robe was still on. The panel on justice reform had just ended. She was thinking about policy. The officer behind her was thinking about control. The patrol lights blinked once, then twice, then followed her like a shadow trained to doubt. She pulled over, rolled the window down, asked why she was stopped, but what he heard wasn't her words. What he heard was her skin. There were no raised voices, no shouting, no threats, just the quiet defiance of a woman who was the law being treated like she had broken it. He asked her to step out. She asked for a reason. He called it obstruction. She called it protocol. And then she did something he didn't expect. She pressed record. No panic, no pleading, just a black woman in a locked car, reminding the badge that power doesn't always make noise. Across the street, a stranger lifted his phone. A second camera blinked red. And just like that, the truth had two witnesses. What happened next didn't go viral because it was rare. It went viral because it was too familiar. But this time, silence didn't protect, it exposed. If you're still with us, hit the like button, not just for the algorithm, but for the truth. Share this if you believe black voices don't need to shout to be heard. And subscribe for more real stories where justice speaks softly, but powerfully. But to understand why that moment mattered, we have to rewind to a quiet road, a woman behind the wheel, and a siren that didn't blink even when justice was staring back. It was just past 8:22 p.m., Fairbourne time. The sky was dark, but the gas station lights flickered like they had something to say, and Reyna Marcel, still in her robe, was about to learn what silence was worth. The silence that evening wasn't empty. It breathed. It lingered on the sidewalk bricks still warm from the day's sun. It floated above the oak trees in Westmore, where porch lights blinked on one by one like tired eyes. It hung inside Reyna Marcel's car between the soft hum of the engine and the ticking echo of her turn signal as she pulled out of the courthouse garage, still wearing her judge's robe. She hadn't planned to wear it this long. But the panel had gone late. The discussion on judicial transparency had run over again, and Reyna hadn't wanted to waste time changing before the drive home. Besides, the robe felt more like armor now, and some nights, armor was easier than explanation. The road ahead was open. Westmore was always quiet after 7, a neighborhood stitched together by old trees and older money, the kind of place where cars drove slow because there was nothing urgent waiting at home. Reyna's sedan moved through it like a thought, steady, deliberate, unnoticed. She drove with both hands on the wheel, not because she needed to. It was habit, a habit born of years, of stories, of the way her father used to grip the steering wheel like it anchored him to the right to be there. Her headlights washed over trimmed lawns, empty driveways, and the occasional flicker of a television behind curtains. Her signal clicked. She changed lanes. The speedometer stayed beneath the limit. Everything was correct. Until the light behind her blinked. Once, then again. Blue and red, bright, unmistakable, distant at first, then nearer, and suddenly right behind her. She didn't panic, didn't curse, didn't fumble for the glove box. She simply exhaled long, low, like a quiet surrender to something too familiar to fight. Not fear, just weariness. Because Reyna Marcel knew exactly what this was. It wasn't about the robe, or the panel, or the fact that she had never once in her career missed a court date, never once violated protocol. It was about the car, the skin behind the wheel, and the badge behind the lights. She signaled, pulled gently to the curb near an all-night gas station with flickering signage, put the car in park, adjusted the mirror, and waited. The officer hadn't approached yet, but she already knew the script. It always started the same way, with lights, then questions, then suspicion shaped as authority. She glanced at the rear view. The patrol car stayed in place, lights spinning, no movement yet. In the stillness, she let her eyes close for just a second, not to sleep, but to steady herself. The robe rustled slightly as she reached toward the passenger seat. Her ID rested on top of her notes from the panel. The topic circled in her mind like a cruel coincidence, bias in routine policing. Outside, the cruiser door finally opened, and somewhere, in the back of her mind, a single thought repeated not loud, but unshakable. Not again. Not tonight. Not here. The flashlight beamed straight into her face, as if the light itself had the authority to judge. It wasn't searching for information, it was searching for guilt, even when none existed. The officer approached from behind as if closing in on a dangerous suspect, not a woman who had just left a criminal justice reform symposium. He didn't run, but every step he took radiated a kind of guarded suspicion Reyna had seen far too many times in courtrooms, in hospital corridors, in early morning coffee shops, a suspicion not based on behavior but on skin color. Dax Mullen, according to the stitched name tag on his chest, was the kind of cop Reyna used to call a gut-feeling officer. No evidence, no reason, just a sense of something being off. Her car, a silver-gray sedan with standard-tinted windows and plates registered in the city, was completely legal. But to Mullen, that very correctness was suspicious. A black person driving a clean car, all paperwork in order, no violations, that had to be suspicious. The flashlight never moved. Reyna didn't squint, didn't lower her head. She sat still, her gaze steady like someone who had been through this more than 10 times before. "License and registration," Mullen said, sharp and impatient like he was talking to someone stalling on purpose. She looked up, not fast, not slow, no bowed head. Her voice was low and even, unwavering. "Officer, may I ask why I was pulled over?" A routine question, a basic right, but in that moment it sounded like a challenge. Mullen didn't answer immediately. He swept the flashlight over her backseat, over her shoes, her purse, the thick folder on the passenger seat clearly labeled from a legal conference. She held his gaze, calm and unshaken. Her question still hung in the air unanswered, but the silence wasn't empty. It was tension disguised as procedure. Finally, Mullen furrowed his brow and said, word by word, "Your windows are too tinted. Your plate looks off. Are you local?" Reyna didn't sigh, didn't argue. She simply gripped the corner of the folder, then replied, "I live in East Fairbourne. I'm returning from a public service event." She handed him her driver's license, vehicle registration, and a federal ID badge. Mullen glanced, barely looked, didn't verify, didn't read. But his hand rested near his gun, and his stare like a blade had already passed judgment long before he knew who she was. "Step out of the vehicle." His tone wasn't loud, but it carried command. No reason, no charge, no explanation, just a command powered by authority, or the illusion of it. Reyna didn't move. She was used to demands disguised as orders. She stayed still, hands on her lap, gaze as calm as still water before wind. She didn't respond. She didn't repeat her question. She just waited. That silence wasn't defiance. It was a test. A quiet space for the other person to stumble over his own pride. Out of the car. Now, Mullen repeated, his voice louder now, no longer composed. Reyna turned her head toward the dash. Her left hand moved slow, deliberate, unafraid. She tapped the record button on her phone. The screen lit up red. She placed it on the dash where the flashing lights from the patrol car still flickered through the glass. No words, no warning. Just a simple act, but one filled with calculation. Because in that moment, she knew words alone were no longer enough. There needed to be proof. Mullen frowned. Maybe he hadn't realized yet. Maybe he didn't understand that the woman in front of him wasn't some teacher running late, or a clerk who forgot her headlights. She was someone who understood the law better than the man using it against her. "You're refusing a lawful order," Mullen said, his hand brushing closer to his waist. Reyna didn't flinch. Her voice was low and clear, not a tremor in it. "I'm waiting for you to state the reason I'm being asked to exit my vehicle. I provided all documentation. I haven't committed a traffic violation." Mullen scoffed, the kind of laugh people give when they've lost logic but still carry a gun. "You trying to play law with me?" Reyna said nothing. Because that question didn't deserve an answer. She still hadn't told him she was a judge, not because she was hiding it, but because she wanted to see how far someone like him would go when he didn't know who he was dealing with. Outside, the gas station lights blinked slowly. A teenage boy stood by the vending machine, eyes catching sight of the parked car. He took out his phone, didn't say a word, just started recording. Inside the car, Reyna remained still. A black woman, in a car that had done nothing wrong, facing a white man who believed he had every right. And in that moment, not with a bang, not with a shout, but with the press of a record button and one unflinching look. Everything began to change. Dispatch. I need a check on a subject. Name is Reyna Marcel. License plate Fairbourne 9X. He mispronounced it, both the name and the tone. Not by accident. But because he didn't actually care, Reyna didn't correct him. She didn't need to. Because she knew when someone has already decided to be suspicious of you, even the way you breathe can be taken the wrong way. The dispatcher asked for clarification. Mullen frowned and repeated it still wrong. When the signal started lagging and the database returned fuzzy results, his patience thinned. His right hand gripped the radio tightly. His left hand started to move, closer to the edge of his gun. Reyna noticed everything. No panic. Just observation. Just like she'd sat silently in courtrooms, watching witnesses misstate a victim's name, she never interrupted. She waited for the cracks to show themselves. Mullen returned to the window, tapped it lightly. His eyes had shifted, no longer scanning, now controlling. "What did you say your name was again?" His voice now laced with irritation and suspicion, as if her calmness was somehow a threat. Reyna didn't raise her eyebrows, didn't bow her head. She opened her wallet and pulled out a thick, green federal ID card with a silver trim and seal. Next to it, her car registration, in her name, listing her address in East Fairbourne. "Reyna Marcel," she said, each syllable landing like a gavel. "Federal judge, currently serving the 4th Circuit District Court. I've just returned from a public service event at Howard University. I presented all required documentation." No explanations, no softening of tone. Mullen glanced at the documents, but didn't pick them up, didn't verify, didn't run the correct name. Instead, he stared at her not like a citizen, but like a problem that needed reshaping to fit the order he was used to. "Anyone can print a badge like this," he muttered. Not a question, just a dismissal. Reyna held his gaze, didn't blink. She didn't need to prove anything more. She'd offered everything. Whatever came next was on him. But Mullen didn't like that. He wasn't used to a calm that didn't back down. He wasn't used to a black woman sitting there, unafraid, unapologetic, unyielding. He took a small step back, but kept his chin high, an invisible battle now underway, not of words, but of who could hold their stance longer. And in that moment, Reyna understood. He didn't really want to know who she was. He just couldn't stand that. She wouldn't bow. Mullen finally picked up the badge, but just barely. No real look, no ID number check, no typing her name into the system, just a glance, a scoff, and a shake of the head. Not because he didn't believe it, but because he didn't want to. What unsettled him wasn't in the badge. It was in her calm, a calm that didn't ask permission, didn't cower, didn't fear being misunderstood. You people. He started the sentence like pulling a thorn from his throat. Then he looked at her eyes pressing against the air inside the car. Always think you're above the law. You people. 2 words like a drop of ink in a clear glass. Not loud, not harsh, but instantly. Everything turned murky. Silence. Even the crickets outside seemed to pause. The car, the night, all of it frozen. Reyna didn't flinch, didn't respond. She lifted her gaze slowly from the papers to Mullen's face. Not cold, not angry, just measured like a sentence being written in silence. She looked at him for exactly 4 seconds, then tilted her head slightly. That look that tilted wasn't a question. It was a cross-examination. She didn't need to ask, "You people." Her entire posture asked it for her. Mullen stepped back, slightly startled like he hadn't meant to say it out loud. But he didn't take it back, didn't apologize. He glanced toward his cruiser. His hand again hovered near the edge of his gun. Reyna remained still. She knew those 2 words. They weren't new. She'd heard them in restaurants, in airports, in classrooms, in emails from colleagues. But this time, they came with a gun, and with perceived authority. This wasn't bias anymore. It was a threat. In that moment, Reyna wasn't just a judge. She was every black woman who'd ever done everything right and still been seen as wrong, just for existing. The gas station light kept flickering. The camera on her dashboard was still recording. And across the street, someone else was holding up a phone. She didn't know who, but she knew this. If she ended up on camera tonight, she would not be on it, with her head down. Because you people didn't make her smaller. It only revealed the fear in the eyes of the man who said it. Wind brushed over the asphalt light, but something had shifted in the air. A subtle change, almost invisible, but Reyna felt it. Mullen stood, hand near his weapon as if that were the answer to his growing discomfort. And then, a voice rang out, not loud, not harsh, just clear enough for both of them to hear. That's Judge Marcel. She ruled on the Langley case. Mullen froze. His eyes darted not in reaction to being heard, but to the name. Reyna turned slightly, not in surprise, but confirmation. Across the street, near a convenience store with its shutters halfway down, a young black man in a gray hoodie held his phone high. The screen lit up live streaming. The frame wobbled, but the sound was crystal clear. Tariq Bowen, senior media student. He'd watched Judge Reyna Marcel speak at his university just 6 months ago, a keynote called The Right to Remain Silent, and the power behind it. He'd never forgotten her face, those steady eyes, each word carving its place in the air. Tariq didn't shout, didn't rush over. He just said one sentence, but it was enough to change the energy. Mullen spun toward the voice, scanning quickly, not recognizing the face, but recognizing the certainty. The power in his posture cracked. Reyna didn't smile, didn't confirm. She simply looked at Mullen like a test now yielding its result. He stalled. One step aborted, and under the dim gas station light, his stance for the first time looked unsure. Not because of the cameras, not because of guilt, but because he didn't know who he was facing. And now, other people did. Reyna hadn't said her title, didn't need to, because true authority isn't about shouting who you are. It's when others speak on your behalf. Tariq kept filming. He didn't need to step closer, didn't intervene, just held the phone steady, documenting a truth too many had seen, but too few believed. One camera inside the car, one across the street, and now Mullen was no longer in control of the space around him. Reyna exhaled softly. She wasn't safe, not yet, but now, she wasn't alone. And in that moment, Mullen realized this wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. The script had flipped, and he had no lines left. Dispatch, this is Unit 214. Mullen backed toward his cruiser, clutching his radio. His tone suddenly sharpened, urgent but without any real cause. I'm dealing with a non-compliant female driver. Possible forged documents. Note out-of-state plates, suspiciously tinted windows. Every word, every phrase. A calculated choice. There wasn't a shred of evidence, but the way he spoke made it sound official, even urgent. This wasn't a report, it was a setup. Reyna remained seated in her car. No reaction, no eye contact. She simply lifted her right hand and tapped gently on the dash right next to the phone that was still recording. A soft tap, like a lawyer tapping the podium before asking the one question that shifts a case, not to dramatize but to signal pay attention. Mullen glanced her way, then looked off as if her silence threw off his rhythm. Suspect may be deliberately stalling, refusing to exit the vehicle. He added into the radio. Though in truth, Reyna had never refused. She had simply asked why. But to Mullen, a black woman asking a question was defiance enough. His words were no longer describing reality. They were bending it, twisting it into something he could justify. Inside the car, Reyna looked at her rearview mirror. She saw his silhouette circling the vehicle, radio still to his ear. She couldn't hear dispatch's reply, but she knew this kind of report. She'd read it 100 times in complaint files. It always started with "I followed protocol," and ended with someone injured or worse, forgotten. She didn't pull out her ID again, didn't say a word, just stayed silent as a statement. Because she understood. The more you speak, the easier it is to twist your words. But silence when cameras are rolling stays authentic. Mullen moved to the passenger side. He tried the door handle locked. He tapped the window, not hard enough to break, but enough to intimidate. You want to make this harder than it has to be, he growled. Reyna stared straight ahead. No flinch, no retreat, just her eyes still as water, but so deep they dared you not to drown. She didn't need to answer, because every word out of his mouth was already being recorded. And across the street, another phone was still filming. The windshield reflected a flicker of patrol lights, but the truth was beginning to come into focus. Reyna's car sat still, brake lights casting a red glow on the asphalt. She sat like stone, unmoving, unshaken, unyielding. Her hand remained near the dash, where the phone kept recording silently, but unrelentingly. On the other side of the street, outside Mullen's line of sight, a woman had just finished her shift. She wore a light blue scrub top, hands still faintly scented with sanitizer. She'd stepped out of the bakery at the corner, her nightly stop for a small sandwich to go. But tonight, she paused. Because the red and blue glow danced across the bakery windows, and the patrol car's radio carried its voice across the street. She'd seen scenes like this before, too many times, online, on the news, in hushed conversations during hospital breaks. She didn't know who the woman in the car was, but she recognized that voice, the sharp bark laced with authority, and the way the uniform didn't listen, only commanded. Without hesitation, she pulled her phone from her scrub pocket. The screen lit up. Her thumb slid. Front camera rolling, no zoom, no narration, just the act of bearing witness. The second camera turned on. Her angle was different from Tariq's closer, lower, from the passenger side, but it captured everything Mullen circling the car, tapping the window, shifting his posture, fingers brushing his weapon. 2 cameras, 2 witnesses, 2 strangers, no coordination, no words exchanged, just one shared instinct document everything. Reyna didn't know about the second camera, but she felt it, the shift in the air. She was no longer alone, no longer her word versus theirs. Somehow, the truth had opened more eyes, and each one was a lens, not armed, but unblinking. Mullen didn't know that yet, still had his back to the bakery, still believed he controlled the narrative. But the truth was, he was surrounded not by protesters, not by a mob, but by the quiet coordination of people tired of injustice. And this time, they didn't step in. They just pressed record. The nurse held her phone at chest level. No shaking, no commentary, just steady hands and the look of someone who'd seen bad things happen, and once regretted not acting fast enough. The second camera kept rolling, and the summer night grew warmer, not because of the heat, but because Mullen had stepped into a space where his power was no longer absolute. A second siren echoed in lower, calmer, like it didn't want to escalate. Another patrol car turned into the gas station. Its lights weren't flashing wildly, just pulsing, as if signaling a quiet intervention. The door opened. A man stepped out, brown skin, close-cropped hair, clear-eyed like he'd already read the whole script. No flashlight drawn, no hand near his gun, no rush, but each step grounded. Lieutenant Carlos Wynn. Reyna saw his name stitched into his uniform before he even got close, not because he stood out, but because she recognized that gaze. 12 years ago, in a Maryland briefing room, she'd lectured a group of young officers on professional ethics. Wynn had been one of them. As he approached, he didn't look at Mullen. He walked around to the driver's side and nodded politely like someone reuniting under less than ideal circumstances. Judge Marcel, his voice was calm, clear. I took your ethics seminar 12 years ago. Reyna tilted her head slightly. No smile, but her eyes softened. Not because they were old friends, but because someone remembered. She nodded. Her hand stayed near the dashboard. You were the one who listened, she said. Remember how I ended that session? Wynn nodded. You said power isn't who gives the order. It's who takes responsibility for it. That moment, short, still, but sharp, split the air into 2 halves. On one side, Mullen, frozen by his cruiser, unable to grasp how quickly the dynamic had shifted. On the other, Reyna, and the only man here who remembered her not by badge or ID, but by knowledge, memory, and respect. Wynn finally turned to Mullen, his first words about the incident. Did you verify her documents? She wouldn't cooperate. Gave me fake ID, Mullen snapped, flustered. Wynn didn't respond right away. He glanced at Reyna's dashboard where the phone kept recording, red light blinking. I think we should stop here, Wynn said. Before you go too far. Reyna stayed silent, but in that silence power shifted. Mullen wasn't screamed at, wasn't shamed in front of a crowd. He was simply ignored. And sometimes being ignored is the sharpest downfall of all. Wynne stopped by the driver's side window, where Reyna still sat motionless, her gaze unwavering. He leaned in just enough. Not too close, not invasive, just a nod formal enough, respectful enough. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I'm sorry. Are you all right?" Reyna didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained on the rearview mirror, where the flashing lights spun endlessly and reflected the image of Mullen standing just a few paces away. Fists clenched, lips pressed tight with the sting of being sidelined from the game he once believed he controlled. "I'm fine," she replied. No shortening, no embellishment, just a steady statement balanced, like the way she'd always rendered judgment measured and firm. Mullen, seemingly unable to bear being excluded, stepped forward and barked. She refused to cooperate. I had to secure the scene. Wynne didn't turn. He didn't need to. His response wasn't for Mullen. It remained with Reyna. "That'll be enough from you." Just 4 words, but they struck like a sentence being passed. Silence returned, but it wasn't the tense, electric silence from earlier. This was a different kind of order. The kind that comes when someone takes control, without ever raising their voice. Reyna finally turned her head and looked at Wynne. Her eyes weren't angry. They carried something far heavier, calm disappointment. She spoke not to complain, but to document. He was provided with full identification, was clearly informed of who I am, and still attempted to open my vehicle door without lawful cause. Wynne gave a slight nod. He'd seen the phone recording. He knew these words, this moment, would travel farther than any internal memo. "Understood," he replied. "I'll take it from here." Reyna nodded, once slow, deliberate. Her hands rested in her lap now, no longer near the recording button, but the camera was still rolling, and she was still in control. From the rearview mirror, the patrol lights continued their useless spinning like a metronome no one needed, but Reyna wasn't paying attention to them anymore. The only thing she saw in that glass was a figure being pushed back not by force, but by presence. Because sometimes, power doesn't come from who shouts the loudest, it comes from the one who doesn't need to speak, to make everything stop. No apology was offered, no excuses made. All that remained was the truth standing stark between 4 people. A judge, 2 officers, and 1 silent witness across the street, phone still in hand. Reyna locked eyes with Wynne, not demanding, not pleading. She simply spoke, and each word fell like it was being struck on a wooden bench in a courtroom. I handed him my identification, each phrase cut clean. He attempted to open my door. A slight pause. That is a violation, not discretionary authority. Wynne didn't take notes, but his eyes moved quickly from Reyna's face to the driver's side handle, to the flashing lights reflecting in the glass. He nodded, not in agreement, but in confirmation it was all crystal clear. He turned, walked toward Mullen, who stood rigid by his cruiser, hands gripping his belt, his expression a tug-of-war between anger and confusion. Wynne didn't lower his voice, didn't provoke. He simply issued an order, the kind delivered by someone trained to command with finality. "Return to your vehicle, now." No shouting, but everyone heard it. Even the nurse still standing in front of the bakery, phone recording, frozen mid-breath. Even the student across the street, camera leveled to his eyes, finger steady on the screen. Mullen didn't move at first, paused as if waiting for someone to defend him, or at least explain things away. No one did. Finally, he turned, walked off brisk but not hurried, his shoulders rigid, his boots striking hard against the pavement, as if each step was trying to say, "I didn't lose." And at that exact moment, the passenger side camera inside Reyna's car caught a small, revealing detail. Mullen's body cam, still lit, still recording. No one told him to turn it off. No one asked if he remembered it was on, but it was recording. And the truth was being saved not just in stories, but in frames, and sighs, and sounds, and in the words he could no longer deny. Reyna watched his retreating figure, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, just silence. Because sometimes someone walks away not because they misunderstood, but because they no longer have permission to stay. She exhaled not for relief, but because a line had just been drawn. Not the kind inked in legal textbooks, but one drawn right here, in real time, in front of witnesses. A line no one should cross, and if they do, the camera will not forget. Mullen returned to his cruiser. The door slammed, but not with conviction. Something in him still refused to accept that power had just exited, without warning. The lights kept flashing, but the thing truly changing color was the air itself. Wynne stood beside Reyna's car a moment longer. No urgency, no chatter. He was choosing his next words carefully, intentionally. Finally, he dipped his head, not low, not ceremoniously, just enough for a man who understands fault without humiliation. "Would you like to file a formal complaint tonight?" "Judge." His voice was real, not robotic, not defensive. It was the voice of someone who understood that every apology comes second to accountability. Reyna didn't answer immediately. Her hands now rested on her thighs, one over the other. Her thumb grazed the edge of her ID as if pressing down on a truth that no one had the right to erase. Then she spoke, not a word wasted, not a syllable uncertain. Just a plain declaration wrapped in the steady breath of someone who's waited far too often for justice, eyes wide open. "You'll hear from my office, and make sure that footage doesn't disappear." Wynne nodded, sharp, decisive. He knew that wasn't a threat, and it wasn't a request, it was the condition for continuing to believe in the system. No more apologies, no tears, no yelling. And that's exactly why. The moment was colder than silence. No weeping, no fury, only control, still and sharp, like a scalpel. Like the verdict she once read aloud after the courtroom had already stood. "This court remains in session." Wynne turned away. He knew his job now wasn't to de-escalate. It was to write the record. Because that footage, both cameras, all three angles would speak louder than any testimony. Reyna reached for the dashboard, tapped her phone. The screen went black, but the event lived on. Across the street, in memory, in a file not yet uploaded. Most would expect her to drive off, to shift into gear, to call her office, wrap this up. But she didn't. Reyna shut off the engine, stayed in the car, turned on the small reading light overhead, opened the glove compartment, pulled out a thin, worn, brown leather notebook, corners frayed with time. She flipped to a blank page, lifted her pen, and began to write. Not to express her feelings, but to begin a new line, the line of truth, in a space where no one had dared write it before. Tariq stood at his apartment window, the pale blue light from his screen casting shadows across his face. He'd watched the video 3 times unedited. No voiceover, just a routine traffic stop like thousands of others uploaded online. But he knew this one was different. No yelling. No scuffle, no blood, just a black woman, calm, educated, non-confrontational, being scrutinized, doubted, and threatened simply for existing. He hadn't said a word while filming, but now, as he prepared to post it, he knew it needed a caption short, honest, no slogans. Tariq typed slowly, deliberately. Judge or not, this could have gone another way. He posted the video to X, the platform everyone still called Twitter. No hashtags, no tags, just a post so that if anyone still questioned whether these things happened, they'd have no excuse left. At first, there were only a few views. A handful of classmates liked and reshared it. But then, the video started to cycle. People rewound to the moment Reyna said, "I gave him my ID." He still tried to open the door. Every small detail in the video felt amplified by its silence. No soundtrack, no effects. And then it spread. A Black community account reposted it with the caption, "Bystander Justice." Another account focused on police behavior analysis titled it, "Systemic Power Trip." Same video. Hundreds of names. And every single one of them was right. Comments flooded in, debates, personal stories. Pinned to the top was a comment that got thousands of likes in just a few hours. She followed the law. He followed his fear. Reyna didn't post the video. She didn't retweet it. She didn't speak to reporters, but her face, unwavering eyes, steady voice started appearing everywhere. Not because she was a judge, but because she stood in for so many people with no title at all, who survived traffic stops like this every single week. In a quiet corner of the city, between phone screens and short clips, a story began to live a life of its own. No PR, no campaign, just one witness, brave enough to hit upload. By morning, the city was still half asleep, but the news had been up since 3 a.m. The cafe next to the gas station, the same gas station where Reyna had been stopped, opened early. As usual, the scent of lightly burnt coffee drifted onto the sidewalk. But today, customers weren't just looking at the menu. Right next to the entrance, taped to the glass door, was a printout black and white from a cheap printer. A still image from the now viral video. Mullen's face, slightly turned, frozen in the moment his hand slammed against Reyna's car window. Beneath it, scrawled in black ink. "This is why we record." No other words were needed. That image, that frame said enough. A seemingly small action, a wordless moment, now immortalized as irrefutable proof. And this morning, that proof was on every screen. In the coffee shop, in family kitchens, on students' phones, nurses, truck drivers, and journalists. Morning news shows jumped in. One network replayed the 30-second clip, zooming in on Reyna handing over her documents and saying, "I provided all the necessary information." Another rewound to Mullen whispering into his radio, "non-compliant," possibly a fake ID. CNN called it "Judge Faces Racist Traffic Stop. Body Cam Raises Questions." Panelists analyzed tone and procedure. One expert said she did nothing wrong. She was profiled for just being there. Meanwhile, Fox News led with driver refuses to comply, identity later confirmed as federal judge. Same video, same face, same voice, but two narratives like they came from two different Americas. No one needed to edit the truth anymore, just add a new headline, overlay a new voice. And suddenly, the victim became the suspect. Reyna didn't watch the news that morning. She was in her office, no TV, no news tabs open. She sat at her desk, the shutters behind her half closed, sunlight filtering through in streaks like thoughts that hadn't yet found words. The phone buzzed with missed calls, but she hadn't picked it up. Because sometimes, the scariest thing isn't being misunderstood, it's knowing someone wants to misunderstand you, even when the truth is right in front of them. Her office sat on the 6th floor of an L-shaped building overlooking a small park lined with red maples. A quiet place, far from cameras, far from hashtags rising like tides every hour. She didn't issue a statement, didn't post anything, didn't answer reporters, didn't call anyone. That morning, She just sat alone, the laptop screen open in front of her, frozen on a single frame. Mullen's arm, his hand reaching, fingers just touching the car door handle. She rewound, paused, watched it again, then again, then again. Not out of anger, not to sear his mistake into her memory, but because that exact frame was the moment where everything could have gone worse. She wasn't dragged from the car, wasn't handcuffed, no gun pressed to her temple, no face slammed against the hood, like so many others. But almost not harmed doesn't mean safe. It could have been worse. She whispered to no one. It often is. Outside the half-drawn blinds, morning light caught the dust particles in the air floating, invisible until they met the light. Just like the truth, always there, just not always illuminated. A printed email from the governor's office lay on her desk, an invitation to a private, off-record meeting. She hadn't touched it. Just like she hadn't touched her voicemail. Just like she hadn't read her daughter's early morning message. "Are you okay? I saw you on TV." She wasn't okay, but she wasn't shattered. She was just still, like the water at the bottom of a lake, just after a pebble drops in. She stared at the printed still from the video, silent. Not in protest, but to remember this wasn't just about her. Not entirely. It was about the hundreds who've been stopped for no reason, profiled for their zip code, their hair, their names, treated like a mistake waiting to happen. Reyna knew she was lucky. She had the robe, the federal ID, the footage, the witnesses, and that's exactly why she couldn't let it go. Because if it could happen to her, what chance did the ones with no defense have? She looked at the frame once more, Mullen's hand on the door handle, and her still in the car, gaze steady, unshaken. No more words needed, because sometimes, when a moment is repeated enough, it becomes a stronger proof than any speech ever could. The conference room was on the third floor of the city police headquarters. No nameplate, no flags, just a small room with pale gray walls, a long wooden table, and 2 bottles of water already placed. No cameras, no reporters, no promises of transparency. Just 2 women, and a system sitting between them, unspoken, unnamed. Helena Maris, the chief of police, entered first. Pressed shirt, hair tied back, eyes alert like someone who'd stayed up all night in emergency meetings. She didn't look tired, but one thing was clear: she didn't want this meeting to happen. But here it was. Reyna didn't rise. Not out of disrespect, she was simply too used to staying grounded in courtrooms, in summits, and now, in a meeting room inside a system that had long protected the wrong people. "Thank you for coming. Judge Marcel." Maris opened, taking the seat opposite. Her voice was soft, controlled like every word had been measured the night before. Reyna didn't respond right away. She set her phone face down on the table. No recording, no filming. This meeting didn't need evidence. It needed confrontation. "Where would you like to begin?" Maris asked. Reyna met her gaze directly. "Let's begin with honesty," she said. "This isn't about an apology. It's about a pattern." Maris nodded slightly. Her face didn't flinch, but her eyes, they flickered. Not from surprise, but from being hit where she'd already been thinking. "Pattern," Reyna repeated, as if the word never made it into reports but echoed in every precinct hallway. Not individual behavior, systemic reflex. "We're conducting an internal review," Maris said evenly. "The officer may be suspended." Reyna leaned in slightly. May a short question, not raised in tone, but like a rock rolling downhill, landing deep inside the stillness of the other woman's mind. We have to follow protocol, Maris replied, her voice slower this time. You know that. You understand procedure. Procedure, Reyna echoed, almost whispering, is exactly why this happened. Not in spite of it, but because it was followed. For the first time, Maris didn't nod. She said nothing, didn't refute it, but her eyes said everything. We're defending ourselves, not reforming. Silence lingered for a few seconds. The soft hum of the AC was like the room's shallow breath afraid to exhale too loud. Reyna stood first. She didn't offer a handshake. She just left one sentence behind, the kind that sounds like the closing of a trial when the verdict is already written. Justice doesn't need defenders, but it does need someone brave enough to start over. The meeting room on the second floor was brighter. Glass windows looked out onto the parking lot, where patrol cars sat, still pretending not to be involved. Inside, another meeting began. Not about justice, but about how to tell the story just enough. A young woman with straightened hair and thin glasses sat at the head of the table. She was the new communications advisor, hired last year, formerly PR for a major insurance firm. Now she was handling a crisis you couldn't spin with a slogan. I've drafted a preliminary statement, she said evenly. She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward the others. We can issue a release as early as this afternoon. Reyna, still seated in the corner of the room, not as a participant but as an observer, tilted her head to read the opening line. We respect all individuals and are reviewing the matter. She didn't laugh, just curved her lips barely, so it was unclear if it was a smile or a clenched restraint. This statement is so neutral, Reyna said, her tone dry as midday heat. Even injustice wouldn't feel offended. No one in the room responded. The young woman adjusted her glasses but didn't revise the line, because in truth, that sentence wasn't meant to be honest. It was meant to minimize risk. Only one person, a deputy chief at the far end of the table, suddenly furrowed his brow. His eyes darted across his phone screen. His finger scrolled rapidly. He didn't say a word, but his face changed. He pushed his phone toward his superior and whispered, We've got a leak. The other man read the headline of the email now circulating on social media. Officer Dax Mullen, prior complaints, internal use only. An internal email no one knew where it came from, but it was too real to deny. It documented 2 complaints filed in the past 12 months. Both involved aggressive behavior during traffic stops. Both were handled internally. No disciplinary action, no reassignment, just closed-door meetings, notes on file, and a gentle reminder to de-escalate next time. But next time was this time. And now, someone had decided to stop keeping secrets. The press statement written to soften the public was now worthless, because the truth online was moving faster than any statement they could write. Reyna didn't say another word. She didn't need to. This time, her silence wasn't protest. It was watching to see who would dare speak the truth before the truth spoke for itself. And once truth starts leaking, no PR strategy can keep it sealed in an envelope. By the time Reyna walked out of police headquarters, the sun was overhead. Not blinding, but harsh, like early summer days when everything is so visible. There's no shadow left to hide in. The lot shimmered in patches of light, but outside the iron gates, a different kind of light awaited camera lights. The press was already there. A row of lenses, black-tipped microphones, hands raised, voices quick but hushed. Judge Marcel, do you have a statement? Will you press charges? Do you think this was racially motivated? Reyna didn't stop. She didn't look at any of them. She didn't push mics away, didn't dodge cameras. She just walked slow, upright, eyes fixed on the gate ahead like it was the final verdict of the day. No prepared statement, No chosen words, no planned message. Just silence. And silence, when held the right way, becomes the loudest declaration. Beneath a tree near the gate, where the shadow marked a natural divide between inside and out, a small group of students stood. Not many. No chanting. Just young faces unafraid, but unsure what to hope for. One girl, about 15, cornrows tight to her scalp, wearing a worn white tee, held a cardboard sign, letters written in black marker, uneven, but unmistakable. She's the judge, but I'm the verdict. Reyna paused for half a second, didn't turn fully, just glanced at the girl, a look that connected. None of the students held microphones, but their message was clearer than any news segment waiting to air. An older journalist tried to push to the front. Voice rushed. Just one word. Judge. One line. They're all watching you. Reyna didn't speak. She didn't have to. Because she knew if she said anything now, every headline would revolve around that line. It would be the quote, the takeaway, and then the world would forget everything else. One soundbite today could silence 1,000 truths tomorrow. She walked through the crowd, low heels clicking against the pavement, each step steady, not hurried, not hesitant, echoing through the silence of people waiting for a soundbite. But there was no soundbite, just stillness, and that stillness had spread, touching each person in the crowd. And that was enough, because sometimes power isn't in being heard, it's in choosing when not to speak. Saturday morning in Fairbourne started slower than usual. No blaring horns, no breaking news, just the chill of early wind and the smell of freshly cut grass. But in front of the city police station, the air felt thick, as if the place was holding the breath of too many people at once. Nearly 40 people had gathered. No one directed them. No one held a megaphone. Just small groups showing up on their own. Someone saw it on social media. Someone else got the video from a friend. They didn't look alike, but they stood close. And the one thing they all brought with them was intentional silence. A line of students stood along the sidewalk, jean jackets, hoodies, one earbud in. Next to them were a few teachers, arms crossed, eyes heavy. No one lectured. They were there to listen, even though no one was speaking. Near the corner of the street, an elderly black woman stood still with a worn wooden cane, holding a hand-lettered sign. "We don't want fear. We want policy." The handwriting wobbled. The ink slightly faded, but each word landed like a nail in cardboard. People walking by read it, nodded. No need for explanation. Inside the station, officers rotated in and out through the glass doors. Some glanced outside, some didn't dare. There was no anger, only the feeling of being seen. A young officer, a rookie, barely 3 months on duty, stood inside watching the crowd for a while. He hesitated, then turned toward the break room and came back with a box of still-warm donuts from earlier, the kind filled with strawberry jelly, dusted with sugar. He brought the box to the front steps, didn't dare step down, just said quietly, loud enough for a group of students to hear, "For peace." A young girl in the group stared at him for a moment, then turned to her friend and whispered, "Donuts." The group laughed softly, not mockingly, but the kind of laugh that appreciates an awkward gesture made with sincerity. The elderly woman nearby nodded. "Peace don't come from flour and frying oil," then turned to the students, adding, "But take one. Let them see we've still got taste and feeling." A boy in a black cap stepped forward and took a donut. He didn't say a word, just looked at the officer, then into the station as if to remind them, this isn't a friendly breakfast. This is a sweet warning. The smell of donuts began to drift gently in the air. But it couldn't cover the deeper feeling building beneath justice isn't about politeness, and silence is no longer submission. It's a kind of language, and today, it was being spoken through eyes, through signs, through the simple act of not stepping back. The elderly woman stood from her folding chair without signaling anyone. Just a slow movement cane tapping the ground, and walked toward the donut box. The young officer still stood there, hands awkward at his sides. Maybe he thought he was doing something nice. Maybe he was partially. She wasn't harsh, didn't raise her voice. She just picked a donut, sugar-coated, filled with apple, then turned directly toward a camera that had started filming. No one knew whose phone it was, just one of many held up, but the lens captured everything and began recording something no one had planned. The woman raised the donut to shoulder height, as if lecturing in her old classroom. "Y'all think justice got a glaze on it now?" Her voice carried, tinged with sarcasm but not sharp. Then she took a small bite, chewed slowly, looked around. The crowd froze for a second. No one laughed right away. She swallowed, then continued, voice clearer now. "We need rules, not roles." This time, laughter broke out among the students. A girl nearly dropped her protest sign, choking mid-giggle. A teacher covered his mouth, shaking his head like a student had hit a nerve. Even the young officer, the one with the donuts, laughed. Not defensively. A real laugh like he realized what he represented. Wasn't enough to make anyone forget what happened. But it wasn't a laugh of relief. No one sighed, no one clapped, because everyone knew the old lady wasn't joking. She'd just used a piece of pastry to say what many older, higher-ranking, microphone-holding officials never dared to say. When the laughter faded, silence returned. A silence with a slight tremble inside. The kind that feels like swallowing a sugar-coated bitter pill. She returned to her seat, still holding half the donut. "Sweet ain't the same as safe," she murmured, then sat down, rested her cane as if she'd just finished delivering a manifesto. Across the street, a reporter looked up from her notes and said to her cameraman, "That woman just said more than the chief's speech 3 days from now ever will." And she was right. On a morning with no bullhorns, no slogans, no script, it was raw, sharp humor that made people feel the most seen. Lieutenant Carlos Wynn stepped into his office just before noon. Outside, the crowd had thinned. The donuts were cold. Protest signs now hung loosely from tired hands. But inside, Wynn. Something was heating up slow, quiet, like a paper cut you couldn't forget. He closed the door, didn't turn on the lights, just pulled the blinds. The room dimmed. The air felt like an interrogation room, except this time, the one under questioning was him. He powered up his computer, put on his headphones, opened the folder marked 214 footage, the file from Mullen's body cam, just under 6 minutes. Not long, but heavy. Wynn had seen it once quickly, during a meeting, with others. Today, he watched it alone. The video began patrol car turned left, sirens flashed, radio chatter, footsteps on pavement, then the soft tap on glass. Wynn didn't fast forward. He let it play at real speed, let each silence hang, felt every gap where better training might have made a difference. And then came the frame, Reyna Marcel sitting inside her car, hands resting on her lap, phone on the dashboard. The interior light cast over her face like the glow of a courtroom not yet called to order. Her voice steady, not harsh, not rushed, filled the air. "If you open that door, you're not just opening a car, you're opening a file." Wynn froze the frame right there. Mullen's hand hovered over the door handle. Reyna's face didn't flinch, didn't avoid, just those eyes fixed, looking straight into the lens as if she knew exactly what was about to happen. and exactly what would record it. Wynne removed his headphones, leaned back in his chair. One hand covered his mouth, the other tapped lightly on the armrest. Then he whispered, barely audible. That was a warning, a legal one. Not a threat, not resistance, but a timely reminder that before he crossed the line, she gave him a chance to stop. And he didn't. Wynne asked himself how many times in his career had he seen something like this, but no one was filming. How many times had people been crossed, unwarned, unacknowledged, treated like unlocked doors? He rewound Reyna's words, played them again, not to memorize, but to remind himself when someone who knows the law tells you, this is the limit, you step back or face the consequences. The auditorium at Coral Ridge High School wasn't anything special. Folding chairs in rows, a low stage, slightly yellow lights from old bulbs. But that morning, every gaze was fixed on the center of the room where there was no podium, no microphone, no news station logo. Just one woman stood there. No judge's robe, no nameplate, no official title attached, only a voice. Reyna Marcel looked out at the young faces in front of her, faces of a generation too young to vote, but old enough to know something isn't right. They didn't smile as easily as the last generation. They were quieter. And when they looked at her, their eyes asked questions before she even opened her mouth. She didn't greet them, didn't introduce herself. She just began as if picking up a conversation that society had left unfinished. I did everything right, Reyna said, voice steady, not shaking, but not cold. Drove the speed limit, used my turn signal, handed over my papers, showed my ID, spoke respectfully, and still, I was nearly pulled out of my car. The front row leaned in slightly. She continued. That's not justice. That's habit, a pattern, a system that keeps sliding, then blames it on an incident. But incidents don't happen this often unless the system quietly allows them to. A curly-haired boy in the third row folded his arms, fingers clenched tightly. A girl in the back pulled out her phone to record but stayed silent. Reyna took a few slow steps across the low stage, not looking up, not looking down, just looking at them. You'll hear adults say, that doesn't happen all the time. But if it happens at the right moment, to the right person, then once is enough to lose trust. She paused, inhaled softly, and for the first time in the entire talk, her voice held a flicker of weariness. And sometimes, silence alone is enough to let everything go wrong. Silence filled the room, not from discomfort, but because each word didn't just float, it landed in their chest. Reyna looked at every face, then said more slowly, I didn't come here to teach you the law. I came to say this: your presence, in the right place, at the right time, might be the only reason someone like me stays safe. One student nodded. Another placed a hand on their chest. No applause, no shouts, but the room seemed to hum as if something had just moved, from memory into awareness. Silence lingered a bit after she finished speaking. No one rushed to raise a hand. Maybe they were still thinking, or maybe still feeling. Then, in the fourth row, a student in a black hoodie slowly raised his hand, not eager, not shy, just careful, like he was weighing whether to ask what he really wanted to know. Reyna nodded. He stood up, voice not loud, but clear. You said you were lucky there was a camera, but what if no one had recorded that day? The question landed in the space like a pebble breaking the surface of still water. Not hostile, not angry, just simple and painful. Reyna stayed quiet for a moment before answering. She looked him straight in the eye, no flinching. If there hadn't been a camera, she said, then I wouldn't be standing here. I'd be a short news blurb, a rewritten headline, A woman who didn't comply. A woman who didn't obey. A woman no one gets to ask anything about anymore. She paused. Without a camera, I wouldn't be a voice. I'd be a conclusion. The room went still again, this time heavier. A girl from the last row pulled a folded sheet of paper from her backpack. She walked to the front, both hands holding a pencil and watercolor drawing. It was Reyna, sitting in her car, red and blue lights reflected on the window. In the drawing, her gaze was steady, not afraid, not resigned. Below it, in shaky handwritten letters, she's brave, so I can be. Reyna looked at the picture for a long moment. Her expression softened not from pride, but because she knew she wasn't alone in remembering what happened. Thank you, she told the girl. And remember, courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just not looking away when someone needs you to see. Another student raised their hand but didn't wait to be called on. Do you think anything will really change? Or is it just going to go back to the way it was? Reyna exhaled softly, a familiar question, and one that deserved a truthful answer. I don't believe everything changes in a day, she replied, but every time someone chooses to look, to record, to turn around, a small corner of the world shifts. She looked around. Young faces, wide eyes, phones, sketchpads, open notebooks, none of them waiting for permission to speak up. All of them ready not to be heroes, but to refuse to be silent. The car glided past the worn brick buildings of Fairbourne. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the windshield pale gold, thin like old stationery. Reyna drove alone. No music playing. The silence in the car felt different now than on the night she was pulled over. Today, it was quiet in a new way, the stillness of someone who'd just set something heavy down, but hadn't fully let go. On the passenger seat, next to a folder of legal papers, was a half-open envelope. A letter, not an email, not typed, blue ink, slightly slanted handwriting written by someone hundreds of miles away, but somehow deeply close. Reyna pulled over by the park lake, turned off the engine. Not because she was tired, but because she wanted to finish the letter without rushing. The paper was thin, creased. The handwriting leaned left, but every word was drawn carefully as if the writer feared being misunderstood. I'm the mother of a 14-year-old black boy in Texas. When I watched your video, I didn't just see you, I saw my son. 10 years from now, I saw him driving home from school, I saw him getting pulled over, and I saw what could happen if there's no camera, no witness, no one who remembers his name. Thank you for staying calm, for not screaming, for letting us see what we've been taught to forget. Reyna stopped reading. Her eyes didn't tear up. She just blinked as if trying to adjust the distance between the view outside and the words now inside her. She folded the letter and tucked it carefully into the folder. Beside it, the internal file on Dax Mullen-worn edges, red mark on the corner. On one side, the unprocessed past, on the other, the unwritten future, and in between her, a woman who once believed that staying quiet was enough. Reyna looked out at the lake, where a few children rode bikes over a wooden bridge. They didn't know anything about the video, and they didn't need to, not yet, which is exactly why she had to keep going. She placed the letter beside the file, not in legal order, but in the order of the heart. Then she whispered not for anyone to hear, just to remember it herself. Change doesn't knock. It gets pulled over. No one clapped. No one filmed that moment. But if someone asked what justice really looked like, it was this woman, sitting alone by the lake, not waiting for justice, but being it. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy. justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.